Kira here. Welcome to part 2 of my April wrap-up. This is the month that I had quarantine pretty much, and I was working from home, so I got a ton of books read. I ended up splitting this into 2 parts. I will leave the first part linked right up here in one of the cards. Please feel free, if you have not watched it, to go back and watch that. It has the first half of what I read in the month of April, and this is the second half. Thank you guys so much for coming back and watching my content. Onward we go to the rest of the wrap-up. The next book that I read in the month of May is Dear Edward by Ann Napolitano. I've seen this book around. I have seen a ton of speculation on this, and when I first heard about it, I was just like, oh, this sounds really interesting. This is basically about a young boy named Edward and his family who are boarding a 6-hour flight to Los Angeles. Recently, Edward's father got hired by a Los Angeles company, so they were moving out there for a job. This book actually takes place during 2 timelines. So it does it in alternating chapters. This book actually extends the plane ride every other chapter and just does it intermittently. Gives you a feel for the other passengers that are on the plane, not just Edward and his family. And they really want you to experience the overall grief of a plane crash. And that's not a spoiler because it happens right at the beginning of the book. You pretty much meet Edward and his family, and in the next chapter they're describing that Edward is literally the only survivor on this plane that crashed. When Edward first experiences the plane crash, he is lucky to be alive. He ends up getting taken in by his Aunt Lacey, who is his mother's sister, and John, who is Lacey's husband. John and Lacey have been kind of having a rocky situation because they keep trying to have kids and they are not very successful. So this is kind of an opportunity for Lacey and John to have a kid, but it's going to be her nephew Edward. So when this book starts, Edward is 12, and the progression of the chapters go until he's graduated from high school and he is 18 years old. What I really respected and adored and cherished about this book was it looked at the long-term effects of grief and how people handle grief. Grief is so profound at points in your life. Sometimes experiences they run in your blood after they happen to you and they change you, and you can't really change back after you've experienced them. You're pretty much living on a day-to-day basis and figuring out how to experience a new world that you've been brought into after your traumatic experience and trying to coexist next to that traumatic experience. Sometimes people forget, and sometimes people are just stuck and they can't forget and they don't want to move on. This book captures grief so completely, perfectly, and it's so significant that I've really felt the impact of it. And it got me really teary-eyed in a few spots, which that doesn't normally happen. I feel those chapters where we see Edward working on trying to get over the grief were much more enjoyable for me. When you flash back to the plane crash and you met more of the passengers. While I was kind of interested in the passengers and their lives, it seems like there was a lot of them, and I feel because there was a lot of them, I never really got to bond with any of them. I feel the only reason why we had the description of the flight and the passengers is because it was really trying to hit home on how impactful this plane crash was, because you actually do get to meet some of the family members of the people that died on the plane crash during this, and I feel they were really trying to hit home about the impact of the plane crash itself, which was great, but I just don't feel that really resonated with me the way it was probably supposed to. So I feel it did some things very, very well, and I don't feel it did other things the interaction with the members on the flight as well. So this book I ended up giving a 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, if you want great representation for the long-term effects of grief, this book does it so well. But over half the book's about them on the plane, and that didn't really feel as enjoyable to me as seeing him working on himself. This book really is a coming of age story too, because he's trying to figure out who he is in a world where his parents and his brother are dead from the plane crash. Once again, not a fan of when we flashed back to the plane crash. The next book that I read in the month of May is In a Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is Carmen's memoir. Carmen is Cuban and she is bisexual. This book is really focuses heavily on how you can have abuse, mental abuse in a female-female relationship. This book actually, it kind of expands like what you know about the LGBTQ plus relationships. And a lot of relationships, you don't really realize like that abuse can be universal. It can happen to anyone. It can happen in any kind of situation or any relationship. And I feel like this book really kind of hit home with that too, because it really dove into how female-female relationships can also be abusive and toxic. This was an exploration of that, how, you know, she was kind of dealing with that. The reason like why it was called In a Dream House is because like she was existing in a house with her abuser, her girlfriend, and it didn't really feel real. It felt very surreal to her. There's also a ton of trigger warnings in this. Mental abuse, physical abuse, gaslighting, off-book mention of sexual assault. This is also about Carmen. She was trying to like, you know, find her self-worth. And this also really does highlight how abusers are enabled and how you continue to be an abuser. It is a very powerful book and very necessary and very important. I actually did a vlog for this, like for the reading rush. I will leave that link in the link above. I loved this. I thought it was just fantastic, and it really just digs into it. It's a very heavy read, and it is a memoir, so it is based on actual fact. They don't name the girl that abused Carmen. I feel like they did that so like they kind of make her faceless, kind of like expand the how universal like abuse can be and can happen to anyone. I loved this though. This was such a great exploration of abuse and everything, and gaslighting. This captured gaslighting so well, and it was so powerful, and it actually like really like messed with your head a little bit. So like I said, I do, if you guys have a question about like the trigger warnings, I do suggest that you look them up for this. The next book that I read was actually a fairly recent release. I loved this book. I actually read Beach Reads by Emily Henry. This is about a girl named January. Her father has just died, and she finds out like that he has a beach house that he lived with his mistress. So she kind of like finds out like all these things about him like after he died, and it kind of like just rocks her world and changes a lot of things. It was hard enough for her when she found out that he died, but like now she's having to go and clean out the beach house and try to figure out like how to move on with her life. She's also very broke. She's a writer. She writes a lot of romance books, and she's very broke. So she figures she's going to go back to the beach house, clean it out, work on writing in her next book. And lo and behold, she has a very tough time with the neighbor named Gus. She's very exhausted, she's emotionally exhausted, and all she does is she wants to get some sleep, and one night there's this really loud house party next door. So she goes over and she confronts her neighbor, only to find out that it is her college nemesis next door, and she is speechless after she has gone through ranted to him how she just wants to sleep. He is also a writer who writes only sad things while she writes only happy things. So you have two authors, two different genres, and hate. So much hate. It's just a lot of fun. So this actually like goes into all these really mushy feelings, of course, because this is a romance, and I loved this romance so much. It was so much fun. One of the things I really loved about this too was that they really focused like on the friendship aspect of relationship, and they didn't rush into actually having a relationship between Gus and January. They really developed it. They really had a lot of friendship in it, and it was just so wonderful, and I loved the friendship and how like they were both kind of there for each other. Like they were both going through quite a bit, but there was just so much emotional support like that they gave each other, and I loved it. And it was about like, you know, moving on and trying like to figure out where you are in life, and I absolutely love this. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. It was just so good, and I just really enjoyed this book. I'm so glad I read it. The next book that I read is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first book in the First Law trilogy. I did a whole review on this, also non-spoilery. I'll go ahead and link that also in the description above. I really enjoyed this. I kind of struggled with it like though, because the reason like why you don't hear a ton about this book is because there isn't much of a plot line. You really just read this book for the characters. The characters like in this are what make this book. and also like they do like a lot of world building. This is 500 pages of world building, setting you up for what is to come in the next 2 books. And actually, like, Joe Abercrombie went and expanded the universe, and he actually has 3 more books after this, and then he's working on his second trilogy after that. So there's a lot in this, like, that he really is setting up, like, it was along with the world and stuff. I really enjoyed this, but because it was 500 pages of setup, I struggled with it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Overall, really enjoyed it. If you guys want more details, like on what I thought about it, go check out that review. But I'm actually in the middle of the second book right now, and I'm still working on going through that one also. I'm probably going to be doing a whole review for the whole series after I finish both of the books, because I don't feel like I can really do like a non-spoiler review of my thoughts until after I have a complete view of where this trilogy is going. So 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read in the month of May, this is one of my most anticipated releases for last year. I was so bummed like that I hadn't gotten to it. And then the Wild Sasha, she actually was doing a read along in May on Discord. So it is the Blood Heir by Emily Wen Zhao. This book was really hyped. I really struggled with this book. I actually ended up DNFing this book. This is my first DNF of 2020. I don't think it's a bad book. What really drew me to this in the first place is that one episode with bloodbenders, like from Avatar: The Last Airbender. They marketed this whole book from that perspective, and I loved that episode. I thought bloodbending was like the coolest thing. Like, it was really dark and morbid, but it was really cool, and I liked the concept of it. And our main character, she is basically a bloodbender. You know, that's just kind of what she does. But I kind of struggled with the main character themselves. She is this princess, and she's outcast. Because she's outcast, she's been like on the street for like about a year, but I feel like it was kind of infuriating, because like if she was that well recognized and everything, you wouldn't think that she would be making so many stupid mistakes. And it was stuff that she could have readily avoided making, but she just didn't. Mistakes, like, I don't buy that you could have survived making these kind of mistakes, and it was really just very infuriating to me. Like, overall, I thought the storyline like was really interesting, but the characters in this really fell short for me. I didn't like it. I didn't. So I don't give out star ratings for books that I DNF. So that one didn't get a star rating. So the next book is one of the books that I have had on my TBR for the longest time. I actually bought this book when I had just started watching BookTube, like almost 3.5, 4 years ago now. I've been watching BookTube for a while. It was actually The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson. This is a YA contemporary surrounding 17-year-old Lenny Walker. 4 weeks earlier, 17-year-old Lenny lost her 19-year-old sister Bailey to a heart arrhythmia. Lenny and Bailey were like very close. They were sisters, and they pretty much did everything together. Like, they confided in each other, and it was just a beautiful friendship slash sister relationship. And I really didn't get a chance to experience like that, but you got to feel for it because of how they framed everything. Bailey and Lenny have been taken care of by their grandmother for the last 16 years after they were deserted by their mother. The grandmother actually kind of justifies it, like, oh, it's kind of a gene, and, you know, like, sometimes people wander, women in your family wander sometimes. That was kind of interesting kind of take on it. I guess she was trying to soften the blow of, like, them basically being abandoned. Lenny's really struggling. She's trying to figure out who she is without Bailey. She's defined, like, her entire life around Bailey, and between the two of them, Lenny always felt like the lesser sister. Bailey's boyfriend, Toby, continues to hang around Lenny, and because like they're so grief-stricken, they kiss. And of course Lenny feels super guilty about it, but at the same time she ends up meeting this guy in band, Joe Fontaine, who loves to play instruments. He's big on it. And of course Lenny herself, she's also really talented in music. So she kind of meets him, and there's like a little bit of a love triangle here, but I don't know, like I don't feel like it was that much of a love triangle. But long story short, it doesn't really like last the whole book, and they kind of like realize like early on, like Lenny realizes like that this is not healthy and she's only trying to feel closer to Bailey. And honestly, like the relationship between Joe and Lenny is like really, really sweet. You see very early on that Joe is like this kind of person that really cares for Lenny and really like wants the best for her, and he's trying to help her cope like with the death of her sister. This book is actually very heartwarming as Lenny tries to figure out like everything out like about her sister. She finds out things about her sister and her mom like that she never knew about before, and it really is a coming of age story and trying to figure out who you are in the world without the people that you love. I really felt like this was really heartwarming. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. This book, this next book, is one of my new all-time favorite books like that I read pretty much ever. I was so excited to read this. It's called The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I have been like looking at this book for quite a while and I wasn't sure if I was going to pick it up, but I am so happy that I did because this book was amazing. If you were a fan of Every Heart a Doorway, this is pretty much like that because it has magical children minus the portal fantasy. So basically like it's this exists like in our world, but like there's magical children who have all these magical abilities. And our main character, Linus Baker, he is a social worker for DeCalmy, which is the department in charge of magical youth. I actually did a whole talk on this as well. I'm going to leave a link for this as also in the description right up top here. I do recommend that you guys go check it out because like I have such a hard time getting coherent thoughts like when I talk about this book because it is just such a wonderful experience. It was heartwarming. I loved it. There was actually a male-male romance in this also, which was really beautiful, but like it was a very subtle romance. Like it felt very natural, it flowed very nicely, and it progressed very smoothly. And it wasn't like something like that radiated throughout the book. It was kind of like in the backdrop of everything else that's going on. But like it was basically like Linus learning that he could dream, and dreams actually do come true. And it was about him having a fuller life from like where he was before. Linus is very by the book, so they send him to this house that has these level 4 children, which is pretty much the highest like level security that you can think of. And so he doesn't know anything until he gets to the island, and then he finds out like who one of the children is, and he passes out. And I'm not going to tell you any more than that because I don't want to ruin it for you. But I cannot tell you guys enough how much I absolutely love this book. It was so amazing and so good. And I just highly, highly recommend this. It was definitely a 5 out of 5 star for me. Like this was so, so good. So we're finally at the last book that I read, because this has been a lot of books, but it's My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. I've been like looking at this book for a long time, and I'm so happy that I finally got to it. This is such an intense book. There are so many trigger warnings. Make sure you guys look them up if you guys decide to dive in this. This really just kind of messes with your head. It's about this young girl named Vanessa Wine, and this actually takes place during 2 different timelines. This takes place like when she's 15 in 2017, and then it takes place several years later, starting in 2000, and then it kind of like works its way up from there. You get to see like who she is like during the abuse, after the abuse, and then long after the abuse, and kind of who she becomes. This book really explores pedophilia and child abuse big time. Basically like what happens is she ends up developing a relationship with her high school teacher, Mr. Strain. And you get to, it really does explore like the mechanics of and how this kind of like relationship, because if this book was very Lolita-ish. So she's this 15-year-old girl and he is this 42-year-old man. So there's the age gap is disgusting. But like what makes like this even more profound is like you get to really explore abuse and how it continues and how it starts and like the manipulation like that goes into this. This actually, like, I'm not one who actually is very like vulnerable to a lot of trigger warnings, but this, like, I would definitely proceed with a good amount of caution because this really fucked with my head big time. Like, I even like was starting to question, like, I was like, does he actually care about her? Like, is this actually a thing? Because like, regardless of like whether or not he cares about her, it's still wrong. But like, it kind of like had me like wondering, because like I really felt for her and it really put me in her place and like what she was going through and what she was thinking. And so like when I dove into this, I really felt like I was in her spot. And being in her spot, like, it kind of like left me questioning, like, does he actually care about her? Or like, is this just a fling for him? Like, I mean, you know, because like how they had it set up, like, there was so many screwed up things about this book, but at the same time, like, it just did such an excellent job of showing you like what abuse can do to you and what trauma can do to you, and how like it kind of like leaves you like in this lurch, because when you've gone through a significantly traumatic experience, it's like you can never grow past that. So it really also emphasizes how she kind of went into how she kind of became emotionally stagnant because of everything that happened. Like, and it was so powerful and such an important read. I feel like if you really like want to dive in to the mechanics of emotional abuse with a relationship like this, then this is definitely for you. This was very profound and it hit me so hard. And that's like the main like reason like why I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars, because like this is a book that I'm going to carry with me in here forever. Like, I'm never going to not be able to like look at this cover and think of Lolita, like the classic Lolita story again, and not think of this story and not reference it in my head. Because I feel like this book was so relevant to a lot of different cases, like where these kinds of things happen and the victims keep their mouth shut, and how and why the victims keep their mouth shut, and what the abuser does to make them keep their mouth shut. I cannot praise this book enough. Like, this was really tough to read and it was very heavy, but I feel like it was just really, really worth it. Like, if you're looking for a book that really dives into abuse. I don't feel like Mr. Strain was likable at all. I don't think I ever actually fell in love with Vanessa either. I think when I read this story, I feel like I read the story because of the mechanics and the things that were going on in it. Not necessarily because I fell in love with the characters. But what I found fascinating about this, especially like if you're into psychology of things like this, I felt like that was like the most relevant thing pretty much like in the whole book. But so that concludes all 16 books that I picked up. I really hope you guys like this wrap up. If you guys like this video, if you guys want to receive emails every time I post, hit the little bell. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, Amazon, and Goodreads. Those links are linked in the description below. And I will see you guys again very soon.